They told her she was cursed. They burned a cross into her skin and drove her into the forest to die. For 8 months she survived alone, sleeping in ruins, eating what she could steal, hiding from the men sent to silence her forever. Because she knew the truth. She knew how the Baroness really died. And the Baron who killed his wife would do anything to make sure that truth died with her. She thought no one would ever find her. She was wrong. A man with a scar through his eyebrow and eyes that saw too much walked into her darkness and changed everything. He said he was a traveler. He lied. The watchtower had been dead for years. Ivy claimed the arrow slits. Bird nests choked the rafters. The smell of damp stone and decay met you at the doorless entrance like a warning. Kieran Oldmark ducked under the lintel and stepped inside. "This will do," he said. Behind him, Bran shifted his weight. The old captain's face wore the expression he saved for situations he disapproved of, but knew better than to argue about. "Roof's half gone," Bran observed. "Half a roof is better than none." "There could be wolves." "Then they'll have company." Kieran set down his pack and cleared a space near the old hearth. He didn't look like a king. That was deliberate. Dark leather coat, scuffed boots, no crest, no banner. Just a tall man with hard eyes and a scar through his left eyebrow and the kind of quiet authority that couldn't be entirely hidden, no matter how common the clothes. He was 33. Some days he felt twice that. They built a fire, ate in silence. Hard bread, dried meat, stream water. Kieran chewed without tasting. His mind was already in Thornfield, already mapping the confrontation with Baron Hatton. The man his intelligence said was stockpiling weapons, buying lords, and building the foundations of a rebellion. He needed evidence, witnesses, something that would hold before the Privy Council. "Get some sleep," Kieran said. "I'll take first watch." "Your leg," Bran started. "My leg is fine." "Now who's lying?" Bran settled onto his bedroll. Within minutes, his breathing deepened, though Kieran knew the old soldier never truly slept, just rested with one eye open and his hand near his blade. Kieran sat with his back to the wall, sword across his knees, and listened. Wind, fire settling, an owl above. Then, something else. A scrape, stone on stone, below the floor. His hand found his sword hilt. The sound came again. Not an animal. Animals didn't move with that careful human rhythm of movement, pause, movement. He picked up a candle, lit it, crossed to the old trapdoor near the eastern wall, lifted it. Stone steps descended into darkness. He went down. The cellar was long and low, walls weeping with condensation. Empty shelves, iron hooks where provisions once hung. She was in the far corner, pressed against the wall, knees drawn up, one hand flat on the stone, ready to run. Her eyes caught the candlelight and threw it back, huge, gray-green, vivid with terror in a face so thin the bones showed through. Dark red hair, matted and filthy, a torn gray tunic, bare feet, raw and blistered. She was shaking with a fine, continuous tremor she probably wasn't aware of. She looked like something the world had chewed up and spat into this hole. He saw her eyes flick to his sword, to the stairs behind him. She was calculating escape routes. "You're hurt," he said. "Not what are you doing here, not who are you. You're hurt." She froze. The running impulse stuttered, caught off guard by words that didn't fit the pattern she expected. He could see it now. Her right hand wrapped in cloth that had been white once and was now brown with dried blood. The wrapping was precise despite crude materials, the work of someone who knew what they were doing. "I'm going to set this candle down and step back," he said. "All right?" She didn't answer. Her eyes moved across his face. Not attraction, not recognition. Assessment. The rapid evaluation of someone who had learned to read threat in a stranger's jaw, hands, and distance from the nearest exit. He set the candle down, stepped back, raised both palms. "There's a fire upstairs. Food. You're welcome to it." Her voice came rough, cracked from disuse. One word. "Why?" "Because you're cold, you're injured, and you're hiding in a cellar." Silence. Her eyes catalogued him. Boots too well made for a common man, coat too finely stitched, sword too expensive. Details that didn't add up. "Who are you?" she asked. "A traveler. Travelers use roads. Not all travelers." She stared at him for a long time. Then, slowly, with the wary movements of a wild animal approaching food it suspects is a trap, she stood. She was taller than he expected, thinner. The tunic hung on her like a sack on a fence post. She passed him at the maximum distance the cellar allowed, back never fully turned, eyes never leaving his hands. In the firelight upstairs, she looked worse. More bruises, deeper hollows, the tremor in her hands more visible. Bran was awake, hand on his knife. Kieran shook his head slightly. Not a threat. "She was in the cellar," Kieran said. "She's hurt." Bran looked at her. Something softened behind his eyes. "There's bread in the left saddlebag." Kieran set food on a flat stone near the fire. She ate carefully. Small pieces, slow chewing. Not the desperate gulps of starvation, but the measured consumption of someone who knew that eating too fast after fasting would only make things worse. Medical knowledge. Kieran filed that away. "When did you eat last?" he asked. 2 days. Maybe 3. "The hand?" "Cut on a nail. Packed it with yarrow and self-heal." "You're a healer." She stiffened as if he'd drawn a weapon. "No. The bandage is wrapped with surgical precision. You packed the wound with herbs you identified by name. You're eating slowly because you understand the consequences of refeeding after fasting." His voice was quiet, observational. "You're a healer." She set the bread down. "It doesn't matter what I am. It matters to me." "Why?" He looked at Bran. The old captain understood and pulled up his trouser leg, revealing a swollen, inflamed calf, skin red and tight, the unmistakable smell of infection. "Because my friend will lose that leg if it's not treated," Kieran said. "The nearest physician is 4 days' ride." She looked at the wound, and Kieran saw the shift, the thing that separated a healer from everyone else. Fear didn't leave her eyes, but something older and stronger rose alongside it. She stopped seeing a stranger and saw a problem she could solve. "How long?" Her voice was different now, steadier. 5 days swelling, Bran said. "Old wound. Took a spear 12 years ago. Healed wrong. Can you feel your toes?" "Most of them." She knelt beside him. "May I?" Her fingers worked with precision that confirmed everything. She pressed specific points, watched for pain responses, checked the pulse at his ankle, examined the old scar tissue. "The original wound was closed too fast," she said. "There's debris under the scar tissue. The body keeps trying to reject it. That's what causes the recurring infection." She worked for an hour. A knife heated in the fire, steady hands despite the tremor. She drained the wound, extracted 2 small fragments of rusted metal, remnants of a spearhead that had lived in Bran's leg for 12 years, and packed the wound with a poultice from herbs kept in a small leather bag under her tunic. The bag was the only thing she owned that wasn't falling apart. Well-made, oiled leather, full of dried herbs wrapped separately in cloth scraps. Her father's bag. Kieran guessed that without being told. When she finished, the swelling had already begun to reduce. "Keep it elevated tonight," she said, wrapping fresh bandage torn from her own tunic. "I'll change the poultice at dawn." "You'll be here at dawn?" Kieran asked. "I'll stay until he's out of danger. Then I'll go." "Where? Does it matter?" "It does to me." She studied his face when he said it. He let her look, offering nothing, hiding nothing. She was the first person in years who looked at him and didn't see the crown. "I go where the forest takes me," she said. "It's safer than anywhere people are." Over the next 2 days, something shifted between them. Not trust, not yet, but the soil in which trust might eventually grow. She gathered herbs each morning. He walked with her, not because she needed an escort, but because he wanted to understand who she was. She moved through the forest like water through rock, silent, fluid, knowing. He moved like a bear in a library. "You could step on the moss instead of the twigs," she said, without turning around. "It's quieter." "I'll keep that in mind." "You won't. Men your size never do." At the stream, she gathered plants with sure hands, selecting leaves that looked identical to his untrained eye. "Your father taught you," he said. She went still. "Yes. He was the healer in Thornfield." "How do you know that?" "I don't, for certain. But your skill tells me you were trained by someone exceptional. And Thornfield lost its healer 8 months ago." Her jaw tightened. She said nothing, but she didn't deny it. "Alice," she said finally. "My name is Alice Raven." "Alice." "Just her name," said simply. "I'm Kay. Just Kay." She turned back to her herbs. "The traveler who isn't a traveler, with boots made by a craftsman who charges by the stitch. Just Kay. You notice a lot. Noticing keeps you alive." Back at the tower, she tended Bran with decreasing reluctance and increasing precision. The old captain's wound improved dramatically. Color returned to his face. And one evening, when she was changing the bandage, Bran said something that made her mouth curve in what might, under better circumstances, have been a smile. Meanwhile, Kieran watched. He watched her ration herbs with the discipline of someone who knew waste was fatal. He watched her position herself with a wall at her back and a clear line to the door. He watched her flinch when he moved too quickly, then cover it by adjusting her bandage. 8 months. She had survived 8 months alone, sleeping in cellars, eating what she could find, treating her own injuries, all because she'd been too skilled and too brave for the wrong powerful man. On the second evening, with Bran sleeping soundly for the first time in days, Alice sat closer to the fire than usual. Not close to Kieran, but closer. 3 feet closer. And those 3 feet felt like a journey. "I need to tell you something," Kieran said, "and I need you to hear all of it before you decide to run." The wariness flooded back into her eyes instantly. "I know who branded you. Baron Edmund Hatton. I know he accused you of witchcraft after you refused him. I know his wife died under circumstances the tribunal never investigated. And I think you know how she really died." Silence so complete the fire sounded like thunder. "How do you know any of that?" she whispered. "Because Hatton is the reason I'm here." "Who investigates a baron? Who has the authority to—" She stopped. He watched the realization cross her face like sunrise. His boots, his sword, Bran's deference, the fine wool, the way he spoke. Not like a man following orders, but a man accustomed to giving them. "Who are you?" Her voice cracked. "Who are you really?" He reached into his shirt and pulled out the chain around his neck. On it hung a ring, heavy gold, engraved with the royal seal of Oldmark, crown and crossed swords. He held it in the firelight. "My name is Kieran Oldmark. I am the king." She was on her feet instantly, back against the wall. Hands shaking, eyes wild with the terror of someone who had been crushed by power and now stood before the largest force in the kingdom. "You lied to me. 2 days. You lied to my face." "Yes." "Why?" "Because if I'd told you the first night, you would have run. And you would have been right too, because every person with power in your life has used it to destroy you. Why would a king be different?" "Why would he?" "Because this one is asking for your help, not demanding it." She was breathing hard. The bandage on her hand had loosened, wound reopened by her grip on the stone. Hatton poisoned his wife, Kieran said, slowly, with arsenic. You found the signs when you treated her. He branded you not just because you refused him, but because you're the only person alive who can prove what he did. The clinical voice emerged through the fear. Arsenic. Small doses in her evening wine. I found the mace's lines on her fingernails, the hair loss, the specific gastrointestinal pattern. I was gathering evidence. He moved first. Will you testify? Before the royal court? What court? His court? His bought judges? Mine. The word dropped like a stone into still water. Come with me to the capital. Testify. I will see Hatton brought to justice and your brand removed. Publicly. Officially. That's impossible. Brands are permanent. The church serves at the pleasure of the crown, and the crown is me. She stared at him. Fear. And beneath it, rising like something long buried, hope. Why do you care? I'm nobody. I'm branded. He stood slowly, crossed part of the distance between them. 8 months ago, the best healer in the southern counties was driven into the wilderness because she was good at her job and had the courage to say no. A man murdered his wife and faced no consequences because he had money and a priest who owed him favors. That is not justice. That is not my kingdom. He paused. And you are not nobody, Alice Raven. The fire crackled. Left at dawn. Bran could ride, barely, left at dawn. Bran could ride, barely, with his leg bound and his jaw clenched. And Kieran put Alice on his own horse. She mounted with the awkward determination of someone who hadn't ridden in months. 7 days to the capital. 7 days of exposure. Kieran chose back roads, forest paths, shepherd's tracks, routes that existed on no official map. He rode in front, Alice in the middle, Bran behind. The first 2 days were tense and silent. Alice rode with her hood up and her wrists covered, flinching at every sound. At night, she slept at the edge of camp, positioned near the tree line where she could vanish if needed. But the silence between her and Kieran had changed. It was no longer suspicion. It was the silence of two people who had said important things and were letting them settle. On the third morning, she asked him a question. Your scar? How? Assassination attempt. First year on the throne. A man with a short sword got past my guards. What happened? I killed him. And the guards who let him through? Dismissed. Not executed. They were incompetent, not treacherous. There's a difference. She considered this. Most kings wouldn't make that distinction. Most kings didn't watch what happens when a ruler stops making it. My father executed men for honest mistakes. My brother executed men for disagreeing with him. By the time I took the throne, half the court was afraid to breathe. It was the most he had said about himself. He said it without self-pity, just the flat honesty of a man stating facts he wished were different. Your father and brother, she said carefully. What happened to them? My father died of fever. My brother was killed in a hunting accident. The words were smooth and practiced. She heard the smoothness. A hunting accident, she repeated. That's the official account. And the unofficial one? Long silence, horses walking, forest breathing around them. My brother was cruel and incompetent. His lords decided the kingdom's survival mattered more than his life. And when they told me afterward, I didn't investigate. Because part of me was relieved. The confession hung between them, raw and heavy. You think that makes you guilty? Alice said. Doesn't it? It makes you human. You didn't order it. You didn't plan it. You inherited a broken thing and chose to fix it. That's not guilt. That's responsibility. Something shifted in his chest. Not dramatic. Not the thunderclap of ballads. Quieter. a locked door turning on its hinges, a sealed room letting in light. "You're very certain," he said. "I've had 8 months to think about what guilt really looks like. It looks like a man who poisons his wife and sleeps soundly, not a man who carries weight that isn't his and lets it keep him awake." He looked at her, riding beside him now, her profile sharp against the green blur of forest, her jaw set with the firmness of someone who had reached her own conclusions about guilt and responsibility and would not be moved from them. He thought, when was the last time someone spoke to me like this? Not as a subject to a king, as a person to a person. He couldn't remember. On the 5th day, they were found. Kieran heard them first, hoofbeats, too many and too fast, from the east. He raised his hand. "Off the road. Now." They moved into the trees. Alice pressed herself against an oak, making herself small. Bran drew his sword. 6 riders in Hatton's colors, deep red and black, came through the forest with the speed of men on a hunt. "Someone told them our road," Bran murmured. "The innkeeper, 2 days back." "We go through," Kieran said, drawing his sword. "There are 6. I can count. She can't fight. She's a liability." Kieran looked at Alice. "When the fighting starts, stay behind the trees. Don't run. They'll have a rider on the perimeter. Stay low. When it's over, be ready. There will be wounded." She nodded. Sharp. The healer understood triage. The fight was short and ugly. Kieran rode out of the trees and the first rider was dead before he understood what was happening. Bran fought from cover, using the trees to neutralize the rider's speed advantage. 4 dead. 1 fled. 1 wounded on the ground with a deep thigh cut, making the high, thin sounds of shock. Alice was beside him before she made the conscious decision to move, hands on the wound, applying pressure. "He's Hatton's man," Bran said, sword still drawn. "Leave him." "I don't leave wounded people." Her voice was steady, clinical. "Get me water." She treated the enemy soldier with the same care she had shown Bran. Stopped the bleeding, cleaned the wound, bound it tight. The man stared at her throughout. "You're the witch," he said through pain. "The branded one. We were sent to find you." "I'm not a witch. I'm the woman who just saved your leg. Remember that when you're asked to testify." She stood. Her hands were covered in his blood, a man sent to capture or kill her. And she was shaking now, the delayed reaction hitting in waves. But her chin was up, and her eyes were clear. Kieran watched her from his horse, blood on his coat and in his hair, and he thought, there, that's who she is. Not the ghost in the cellar, not the fugitive in the forest. A woman who heals her enemies because she cannot do otherwise. And he thought something else. Something he wasn't ready to say aloud. Something that had been building since a dark cellar and 3 syllables. "You're hurt." That had changed the direction of his life. They reached the capital on the 7th day. Old Mark rose from the river plain like a crown of stone. High walls, cathedral spires, the castle on the hill above it all. Alice stared at it with an expression that mixed awe and dread. "I've never been here," she said quietly. "It's just a city." "It's your city." He looked at her. She had changed over 7 days. She still flinched, still watched the doors, still slept light. But she met his eyes now when they spoke. And sometimes, rarely, briefly, something crossed her face that wasn't fear or calculation. Something almost warm. "What happens next will be difficult," he said. "The court, the council, the church, they won't be kind. They'll call you a witch and worse." She looked at her wrist, the brand hidden under cloth, the black cross that said less than human in a language everyone understood. "I've been called worse by people who matter less," she said. "Let them try." The scandal was immediate. The king had returned with a branded woman, a witch. By noon, the city hummed with outrage. The Council of Lords convened within hours. "This is unprecedented," said Lord Ashworth, the eldest counselor, a branded criminal in the royal castle. "Baron Hatton murdered his wife," Kieran said. He stood at the head of the table in his traveling clothes, road still on his boots. Slowly, with arsenic. The woman who discovered the poisoning was branded to ensure her silence. "I've brought her to testify." "You cannot remove a church brand," said Bishop Corwin smoothly. "It is a sacred judgment. It is a mark burned into a woman's skin by a priest paid by her accuser." Kieran's voice cut like steel. "There is nothing sacred about it." The bishop went white. "I am convening a royal court. 3 days. Hatton answers for murder. Alice Raven testifies. And this council either supports justice or explains to the kingdom why it chose to protect a murderer." He walked out. The 3 days before the trial were the longest of Alice's life. She was given a room, small, plain, clean, a bed, a window, a door that locked from inside. She stood in the center and stared at the bed for a long time, because it had been 8 months since she had slept in one. She sat on the edge and pressed her hands to her face and cried. Not dramatically, just a quiet release of everything she had held together with stubbornness, and the memory of her father's voice saying, "Steady hands, steady heart." A knock. She wiped her face, opened it. Kieran stood in the corridor. Clean clothes, grime washed away. He looked like what he was, a king. But his eyes were the eyes of the man who had said, "You're hurt," in a dark cellar. "The court assigned you an advocate," he said. "A lawyer." "I don't need a lawyer. I know what I saw." "You need one because Hatton will have 3, and they will try to destroy not your testimony, but you, your character, your credibility, the brand." She leaned against the doorframe. "You're trying to protect me. I'm trying to prepare you." He held out a bundle of cloth. She unwrapped it. A healer's kit. Fine leather case, brass clasps. Surgical tools of excellent steel, clean linen rolls, glass vials, a polished stone mortar and pestle. "For the trial?" she asked. "For after. Whatever happens, you are a healer. You should have the tools of your trade." She held the kit and her throat worked, and she pressed her lips together very hard. Her father's old bag on the shelf, this new one in her hands. A bridge between what she had been and what she might become. "Thank you," she said. Inadequate. They both knew it. They let it stand. The royal court convened on a gray morning in the great hall. Stone walls rising to vaulted shadow, tall windows, rows of benches packed with lords, bishops, merchants, and commoners. Baron Hatton sat flanked by 3 lawyers and an expression of wounded dignity. A large, thick-necked man with shrewd eyes and the complexion of someone who drank well and often. He looked at Alice when she entered the way you look at an insect on your plate. Alice walked to the witness stand in a simple gray dress. Clean, plain, the dress of a working woman. Her hair washed and pulled back. And the brand on her left wrist, uncovered, visible, deliberate. "Let them see it," she had told Kieran that morning. "Let them see what their justice looks like." The hall fell silent. Hundreds of eyes fixed on the thin, pale woman with the brand and the steady hands and the gray-green eyes that looked at the assembled power of the kingdom and did not flinch. She told them everything. She told them about her father, Thomas Raven, who had served Thornfield as healer for 20 years, about taking over his practice, about the trust the people had placed in her. She told them about the Baroness, Lady Margaret Hatton, a name no one else in the proceedings had thought to mention. Margaret, who came to Alice with stomach pains and hair loss and a metallic taste in her mouth. Margaret, who was dying slowly at her own dinner table, poisoned by the man who had sworn before God to protect her. She told them about the arsenic, the Mises lines on the fingernails, the peripheral neuropathy, the specific gastrointestinal pattern. She spoke in clinical detail, in precise medical language, and the hall listened in absolute silence. She told them about confronting Hatton, his rage, his hands on her arms, his breath on her face, his voice. Who do you think they'll believe? A baron or a healer's daughter? She told them about the tribunal. One day, charges written in Hatton's hand, the brand, the iron heated in the church's hearth, the smell of her own skin burning, the sound she made that she couldn't remember afterward because her mind had gone somewhere her father was still alive, and the world still made sense. She told them about the forest. 8 months. Alone. When she finished, the hall held a silence that wasn't tension or anticipation. It was the silence of people who had heard a truth so stark, it left no room for noise. Hatton's lawyers tried. They called her a witch, a liar, a scorned woman. They produced servants and the priest who testified she performed dark rituals, cursed the Baroness, practiced devil's work. Alice listened to each accusation with the steady expression she wore when examining wounds. When the Chief Justice asked if she wished to respond, she held up her hands. These hands have set bones, stitched wounds, delivered babies, mixed medicines. In 12 years of practice, my father's and mine, not one patient died of our treatment. Not one. She turned and looked directly at Hatton. You killed Margaret, and you burned my skin to hide it. But skin heals, my lord, and the truth doesn't burn. The verdict came the next day. Guilty. Baron Edmund Hatton, guilty of murder by arsenic poisoning, stripped of title, lands, and freedom, imprisoned until death. Father Malthus, defrocked, charged with corruption of ecclesiastical office. Then Kieran stood. The buzzing hall went silent. The king walked to the center of the floor, not to the throne, among his people. 8 months ago, this woman was branded and driven from her home. She lost her livelihood, her name, her place in the world. She lost everything except her skill and her courage, and those, it turns out, are the only things that cannot be burned away. He turned to Alice. Alice Raven, by royal decree, I order the removal of your brand and the full restoration of your name, your rights, and your standing as a free citizen of this kingdom. The removal was performed publicly by the royal physician. Alice sat in a chair in the center of the great hall before hundreds of witnesses, and she did not look at the physician's hands or the assembled crowd. She looked at Kieran, and he looked back. And in that look was everything. Every night by the fire, every conversation on the road, every layer of trust built one fragile piece at a time. The way he had said, "You're hurt," instead of "What are you?" The way she had said, "That's not guilt, that's responsibility," and given him the first peace he had known in years. She did not become queen. This was not that kind of story. Kieran offered her the position of royal healer, the first woman to hold the title in the history of Oldmark. She accepted. Chambers in the castle, apprentices to train, resources she had never dreamed of. Her father's leather herb bag sat on a shelf beside the kit Kieran had given her, and sometimes she touched both and felt the distance between who she had been and who she was becoming. The court whispered, "The branded woman in the castle, the king's pet witch. Let them whisper." Months passed. She healed, not just patients, herself. The flinching lessened. Sleep improved. The sharp bones of her face softened. The gray-green eyes that had held nothing but survival began to hold other things. Curiosity, purpose. And sometimes, when a certain tall king appeared in her workshop doorway with transparent excuses, "I have a headache. Is this herb poisonous?" Bran's knee is clicking again. something that looked very much like the beginning of joy. One evening, he came with no excuse at all. He stood in the doorway and looked at her, and she looked at him, and the silence between them was the comfortable, lived-in silence of two people who had walked through darkness together. "Your scar," she said. She crossed to him, reached up. Her fingers touched the line through his eyebrow, gently, with a healer's precision and something more. "It's healed well," she said. "Still aches sometimes." "Scars do that. They don't disappear. They become part of you. Just history. Just proof you survived." She paused. "But they stop hurting. Eventually." He opened his eyes. Her hand was still on his face. She was closer than she had ever willingly stood to another person in all those months of hiding. Close enough that he could see gold flecks in her gray-green eyes, the faint freckles across her nose that had appeared now that she ate properly and spent time in sunlight. "Alice," he said. "Kieran," she said. And he smiled. A real smile that reached his eyes and stayed. The kind he had forgotten he was capable of. The kind that looked, on his hard-scarred face, like sunrise over a landscape that had been dark for a very long time. "Stay," he said. Not a command, a question. The most important question he had ever asked, stripped of everything except the simple need of a man who had found, in the last place he expected, the person who made the weight of the crown bearable. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. "I have patience in the morning." He laughed, quiet, surprised, as if the sound had been hiding in his chest, and she had found it the way she found everything, with steady hands and stubborn refusal to leave anything broken. She took her hand from his face, turned to her workbench where herbs were drying and tinctures brewing, and the evening light turned everything to gold. "Go to bed, Your Majesty," she said. And he heard what she meant beneath the words. The thing neither of them was ready to say aloud, but both of them knew. The way you know the sun will rise, not because anyone promised, but because the world has a memory of light. And once you've seen it, the darkness never wins completely. He turned to go, stopped at the door. "Alice?" "Yes, it matters to me." Fourth time, same words, and she smiled. A real smile, the first full one he had seen from her, the kind that transformed her thin face into something luminous and warm and startlingly beautiful. "I know," she said. "It matters to me too." He left. His footsteps faded down the stone corridor. She listened until she couldn't hear them anymore, and then she stood in her workshop, in her castle, in her life that had been returned to her by a man who had looked into a dark cellar and seen not a branded woman, but a person worth saving. She touched her wrist where the brand had been. The scar was still there, faint, silvery, a ghost of the black cross that had defined her for 8 months. It would never fully disappear, but it had stopped hurting. She picked up her father's herb bag, opened it, breathed in the smell of dried rosemary and sage and chamomile, the smell of healing, the smell of home, the smell of a life she had thought was lost and found again in the most unlikely place, in a ruined tower, in the dark, in the words of a king who didn't say, "What are you?" but "You're hurt," and meant it.